listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you. Welcome to The Briefing. A hacktivist group says it'll soon release tens of millions of tracks scraped from Spotify for free, prompting some to declare the golden age of piracy is back. So, after spending years on the decline, why are more of us once again taking to the high seas?
It feels like the very thing that dealt like a big blow to pirating is now the same thing that's pushing people back to it.
That deep dive into the return of piracy is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Sasha Barber-Gadd. It's Tuesday, the 27th of January.
Hey, Chris, and starting with Australia Day, and the country has marked January 26 with both Invasion Day and March for Australia rallies, with a number of incidents right across the country marring the day. Starting in Sydney, where a man has been charged after getting up at an anti-immigration event and allegedly sharing anti-Semitic views at an open mic session.
We will allege that the language he used, his presence, was clearly and unequivocally assigned with neo-Nazi ideology.
That was Assistant Commissioner Brett McFadden speaking there. While in Melbourne, also at a March for Australia event, one man is being looked at by police for allegedly performing the Nazi salute. Brisbane's event, meantime, played host to One Nation leader Pauline Hanson, who received a rockstar welcome.
It's 2 years before the next election. If you want to see One Nation succeed, then come on board on this journey, this roller coaster road that is going to see us win seats at this next election. And then it will be on.
In Perth, a scary situation saw police quickly move to disperse 300 protesters at the city's Invasion Day march after a suspected explosive device was thrown into the crowd. A 31-year-old man was arrested and police are investigating whether the object, which included nails and ball bearings wrapped around an unknown liquid, was in fact a bomb. But they are confident that there is no ongoing threat to the community. Western Australian Premier Roger Cook described the incident as completely unacceptable.
That a peaceful protest was targeted in this fashion runs against the very heart of what it means to be Australian. We can't let hate win.
Yeah, some real contentious scenes right across the country there, Chris. And in Canberra, Anthony Albanese actually broke from his prepared speech to emphasise that hope, not fear, is what will unite Australians.
Love, not hate. Hope, not fear. Optimism, not negativity. And indeed, unity, not division. That is the Australia of 2025.
I'm not sure why he referenced 2025 there, but he was addressing the new citizens of Australia who took part in the citizenship ceremony in Canberra there. And it was a hopeful message from the PM on, as I said, was really divisive, and that's kind of what January 26 has become, whether you mark Australia Day and you celebrate it or you are in mourning and you mark Invasion Day. It's divisive. We can't quite agree on what to do. And I think after the summer we've had, and this is exactly what Anthony Albanese spoke about in his statement that he issued as well yesterday morning, is that, it's been a really tough summer for Australia. And I think all of those feelings and fears really bubbled over yesterday as we saw. I do want to make the point, in Sydney at least, the Invasion Day turnout was much bigger than the March for Australia turnout, which, I think what we saw in Sydney, there were Heil Hitler salutes. They were talking, some members of the crowd were saying Heil Thomas Sowell, who is the leader of the neo-Nazi group, the National Socialist Network. And there were chants for the white man, quote unquote, that I heard in some broadcasts. So, it's quite concerning, especially with all the new hate speech laws that we've seen come out in the last couple of weeks, that these events are still taking place and people are still spreading this message in public. So it is, like I said, really a divisive day, January 26, and it doesn't seem like there's any solution on the horizon.
Millions of Aussies are bracing for scorching temperatures today as a heatwave bears down on the southeast of the country. But the biggest concern remains in Victoria, where it'll nudge 50 degrees in some parts. Those conditions are expected in the north and northwest of the state, with some towns set to experience 7 days straight of above 40 temps, today being the hottest of the run of scorching weather.
Authorities are on high alert at a bushfire burning in the Otways, which is near the Great Ocean Road, which just last week, Chris, was hit by major flooding. So at the time of recording, an evacuation warning is current for a number of locations, which were door-knocked yesterday by emergency services.
Evacuate and leave now to be safe. There is a real risk that this fire will tomorrow break its containment lines.
That was Alistair Drayton from the SES speaking yesterday. A total fire ban is in force across Victoria today. In Melbourne, it's set to hit 45 degrees. That's the hottest day since 2009, while Mildura in the northwest is braced to break the state's heat record with a forecast top of 49 degrees.
Yeah, and elsewhere, after reaching 44 degrees yesterday, Adelaide will swelter again with a top of 41. A reminder, if you are in one of these spots, check in on elderly friends or neighbours, stay inside if you can, and drink plenty of water. A reminder, heat waves are the deadliest natural hazard in Australia, estimated to have killed more than 1,000 people over a 4-year period.
To the US now, where Donald Trump says his administration is reviewing everything in relation to the fatal shooting of Alex Pretti by federal ICE agents. The 37-year-old ICU nurse was shot dead on Saturday during an altercation with Border Patrol officers in Minneapolis, becoming the second US citizen in less than 3 weeks to die this way.
After facing mounting pressure from the Democrats as well as his own party and its backers, the president told the Wall Street Journal this morning his administration is looking at all the evidence and will soon, quote, come out with a determination. Asked twice, he did not answer if the officer who shot Pretti had done the right thing. He did, however, flag that there will be an eventual withdrawal of immigration agents from the city, saying, quote, at some point we will leave, and that they've done a phenomenal job. Now, we have heard an update since then. A few hours ago, he posted to Truth Social, the president posted to Truth Social, and he announced that he was sending his border czar, Tom Homan, to the state. He didn't say what he'll be doing, but he did say that Tom is tough but fair and will report directly to him, and that he would be collaborating with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. If you remember there, that's Kamala Harris's running mate, a Democrat. And interestingly, he, over the weekend and into this week, he's been calling for the removal of federal agents from the state. But now we have this commentary from Trump that they'll be working together, which, if true, is a great outcome, because we do need to be seeing Republicans and Democrats working in this country, especially in this state and city. Interestingly, putting Homan in charge of ICE operations in Minneapolis, what Trump's done there is he's bypassed the normal chain of command. So like we mentioned yesterday, this is Homeland Security's head of power. This is Kristi Noem's head of power. She's the one that's meant to be overseeing all these operations. By putting Homan here, he's kind of bypassed the chain of command. So it's very, very interesting to see if this space evolves any further. There are calls for Kristi Noem to step down. Will that happen in the coming weeks? Time will tell.
A hotline for tradies struggling with their mental health has reported a massive increase in activity over the Christmas break, prompting calls for more Aussie men to reach out. Calls to suicide prevention line Blue Hats soared to 440 calls in the month of December. That's a 65% increase on the same time the year before. And while the uptick can be attributed to site shutdowns and the usual stresses over the holiday season, they do reflect an alarming trend.
Yeah, men alone account for 75% of suicides in this country, while men in construction specifically, they're twice as likely to die by suicide compared to men who work in other industries. The government's special envoy for men's health, Dan Rippercholi, says the figures are alarming, and he's calling on more men to have more conversations about their mental health struggles with friends, families, and even strangers through services like Blue Hats.
And the quarterfinals of the Oz Open are getting underway today, with Aussie hopeful Alex Pretti taking on world number 1 Carlos Alcaraz. He's got a big ask ahead of him, Chris. The Demon's no stranger to a quarterfinal, but he's never won one in a Grand Slam. And while he does think he can get it done, history's not exactly on his side.
Yeah, I know. He's made it to 7 quarterfinals in Grand Slams. Look, huge effort. Well done to him. Amazing achievement. And he has been saying that he's been training and working really, really hard to disrupt, the world number 1 and world number 2 and whatever. But I don't think he's going to get it done. But look, we'll still flick on the telly and give it a watch.
Of course.
Also in action today is Alexander Zverev, Coco Gauff, as well as Arina Sabalenka. We've also got some Legends matches going on today. We've got Mark Philippoussis and Pat Rafter. They'll be playing doubles together.
Cute.
But someone who we won't be seeing in doubles action anymore is your favourite, Nick Kyrgios. He is out of the mixed doubles with his Canadian doubles partner, Leylah Fernandez. They lost yesterday. That was a fun match to watch. Also out, and someone we won't be watching anymore in the AO, is Madison Ingles, our Aussie hopeful there. She lost yesterday to Iga Swiatek, but she walks away with $480,000.
Not bad. That's not a bad payday for what? A week's work. I know a lot more goes into it. Before people come at me, people know that I have feelings about tennis. That's a decent payday.
Yeah, it's a decent payday. And what she wants to spend it on is equally, like, not equally, but it's also hilarious. She says she wants to buy a Smeg toaster.
Oh, well, they're expensive. I had to downgrade to the DeLonghi. Couldn't afford the Smeg.
Mate, $480,000 and she wants to buy a toaster. She said if she wants to treat herself, she might get the matching kettle as well.
That is a treat. I'm telling you, I looked at it. It's bloody expensive.
Oh, I love to hear it. Oh, and also big dream one day. She said she wants to get a Mini Cooper.
Oh, yeah.
Very cute, very cute. Look, that is it for our headlines for today. Coming up next is my deep dive into the resurgence of piracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we are once again taking to the high seas. Stick around to find out why. It's deep dive time, and before we properly get into this one, allow me to set the scene. Yeah, smells like a mix of Impulse and Lynx Africa. You're surrounded by frosted tips and at a moment's notice could be blinded by a bedazzled track pants stamped with the word juicy. It's the 2000s. And while somewhere nearby there's a Boost Juice blender screaming for mercy, there's also a screen blaring this bad boy. The sweet sounds of an ad that assumed we wouldn't steal a car or a handbag and reminded us that piracy is a crime. And let's be real, the campaign did very little to deter a generation of LimeWire and Pirate Bay users from ripping songs, movies, shows and games from the internet, especially here in Australia, which at the time was one of the world's worst countries for online piracy. But that all started to turn around about 10 years ago when the government started blocking access to thousands of illegal sites just as affordable streaming options like Netflix arrived down under. And we actually got to a point where the number of Aussies pirating movies specifically fell from 49% in 2015 to just 21% in 2018. Fast forward to present day though, and we're seeing a bounce back. Visits to piracy sites have surged to well over 200 billion worldwide, while around 1 in 3 Aussies say they're again taking to the high seas. And now, with hackers promising to release 86 million audio files they've scraped from Spotify for free, some corners of the internet are declaring the golden age of piracy is back. Joining me now, so you don't have to suffer through hearing my voice for this entire deep dive, is my wonderful co-host, Sasha Barber-Gadd.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me. But before we get into the present day of this golden age of piracy and whether it's really back, look, you mentioned that we saw rates start to drop 10 or so years ago, around 2015. There was government action. We also saw the rise of streaming. Talk us through what was happening then a bit more.
Yeah, so in 2015 specifically, there were some changes to our copyright legislation, and they gave rights holders, so people or companies who made TV, music and movies, they gave them the power to apply to the federal court to block overseas sites that were offering up pirated versions of their content for free. But it was very much a whack-a-mole kind of vibe. They would take one site down, another one would pop up, and it would pop up on a different domain. So instead of being thepiratebay.org, you could go and access it at thepiratebay.se, the Swedish version, until you couldn't. And then you try another one like thepiratebay.sx. I'm, of course, speaking not from personal experience, but you get the point.
Yeah.
I don't doubt, though, that the laws and takedowns did deter some people because it would force you to go to new sites or click into new windows that you might not have in the past, which would make some people a little bit uncomfortable because it drove up that risk factor.
Risk, that's the thing about pirating, isn't it? Especially then, you know, whether it was music on Napster or on LimeWire or movies through BitTorrents, it was inherently risky. And that's not necessarily because it was illegal, but because you ran the risk of getting a virus. I know many people who got that, not me though. Or, you know, you'd sit there and download something for 3 days only to open it and find something completely different. So it wasn't like this is easy and straightforward 100% of the time.
Which is why then when something like Netflix enters the market at $10 a month, you're able to access thousands of films and shows legally. There's no ads. It made perfect sense for a lot of the people who were pirating at that time. You know, for the first time, we had access to titles, especially in Australia, that you couldn't get even if you scraped or spent hours combing through Blockbuster, because also the way that broadcast rights and things like that in Australia, there were a lot of TV shows and movies that we didn't get, or you'd have to wait months to get. So that was a real, draw card and reason that people started flocking towards Netflix. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of choice when it came to streaming in Australia. You had Stan and Presto, if you remember Presto. But while Netflix had its originals and was going really hard marketing them, at that point it was like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black.
Oh, yes.
They also had the rights to a lot of Disney's catalogue and Pixar's, Marvel, Sony, NBC, HBO. So think titles like The Office, Frozen, Star Wars, Avengers, Parks and Recs, Friends, Avatar, all great shows and movies that are no longer on that platform.
Yeah.
But then before we knew it, all of these studios entered the space, took back control of their huge libraries, chucked them behind paywalls. Hello, Disney, Paramount Plus, Binge, Apple TV, HBO Max.
Yes, I know. And not to mention, like, there's been the introduction of tiered subscriptions, price hikes, the crackdowns on household sharing. Yeah. And we know that spend on subscriptions in Australia has hit record highs. The average household now pays for around 3 to 4 streamers, and they're spending around $80 a month. And so it feels like the very thing that dealt like a big blow to pirating is now the same thing that's pushing people back to it.
Yes. And I mean, another underlying theme to all of this is the fact that when it comes to streaming, we're being asked to pay for all of this content, but we own none of it. We own absolutely none of it. If we take the average, so let's say the average of $80 a month, that's $960 a year. And the second we stop paying, that disappears. All our watch list we've put together, the playlist we've put together, even when you buy a song on iTunes, for example, if an artist or a record label decides to pull that song that you've quote unquote purchased and downloaded and put on your device, it leaves your phone. So we're in this economy now where we're paying for licenses, not for actual content. The counterpoint, of course, is that with streaming, we have access to so many more titles, and that's at a price that would be ridiculous if we had to pay for each and every one of them. But there is this pushback that's growing and growing in so many different ways, and we can see that clearly in the Spotify hack as well.
Yes, and that is the story that sparked this whole chat. There's a hacker group called Anna's Archive, and it claims that it scraped 86 million tracks from Spotify's catalogue. They did this back in December, and that they'll release it all for free sometime this year. Some are calling it one of the most brazen digital heists of all time.
Digital heist is such a great phrase.
Forget the Louvre. Let's talk digital heists. Look, the hackers say they haven't put in any ransom demands, but they did it because they want to build this publicly accessible archive for all the music and metadata on the platform. Quite idealistic. Have we heard from Spotify and what their plans are around this?
We have. They confirmed that a third party used unauthorized methods to scrape its data and that they're investigating it. They haven't told us how many files have been accessed, but they did confirm that metadata was taken. So when we say metadata, we're talking about things like track names, artist and album names, genre it belongs to, release date, duration, the artwork, whether or not it's explicit or not. Essentially, every single data point you can think of that goes into a track or something that you click on Spotify, this is all the data that they've kind of collected and aggregated. Now, according to reports, some of that metadata has already been leaked. And the fear among some experts is that, you know, while Anna's Archive, the ideal there is that they're building this beautiful library for us to go and listen to things for free forever and ever and ever, all their data that they're putting out, all their metadata that they're putting out, can be scraped to train large language models, which wouldn't be great for artists if it's used in the wrong way to, you know, train more and more AI musicians.
Yeah, well, and that's the aspect we haven't actually touched on yet, and that is the artists. While this revival in piracy seems to be all about us or consumers taking back control, it does come at a price.
Yeah, it does, and we'll get into the financials in a second, but I think it's important to take note of what it is we're pirating. In Australia, at least, we're pirating TV shows the most, followed by movies, then live sport, and then music comes in at 4th, and that's followed by video games and other software. As to the economic impact, the last big report that looked into it in Australia was by Ipsos and Oxford Economics, and that was on behalf of the Australian Federation Against Copyright Theft. That was back in 2011.
Yeah, that's a long time ago for this conversation.
But it found that pirating music, movies, TV shows and games had cost the economy over $1.3 billion just between 2010 and 2011. And that was in the form of lost sales alone.
Yeah.
And it led to around 6,100 job losses. So it's not insignificant.
No.
But those who defend pirating do make the point that the economics of our entertainment industry at the moment are already broken. You know, they argue that film studios have multiple revenue streams that don't rely solely on streams. And for musicians in particular, streaming payouts are notoriously bad. You know, for many artists, they're paid fractions of a cent per play, and that does very little to sustain a musician's career.
Yeah.
So in that respect, they kind of go, yeah, okay, the artist might be copying it, but Is it us that's doing the damage, or is it, these big platforms and tech platforms that are doing it? So it is very Robin Hood-esque.
Yeah.
But also, let's just remember, we're talking about companies that record billions in profit a year. Disney made $18.5 billion last year, and Netflix hasn't dropped their financials yet, but it's expected that their profits will be between $15 and $20 billion. So, I mean, is it, the worst thing that could happen to this company?
Yes, it is, because it's illegal.
Yes, correct.
No,
correct.
look, before we wrap, is this something that the government's paying any attention to? You mentioned that report all the way back in 2011 in terms of economic impact. Have they said that they're going to be looking into this closely now that we're seeing this kind of piracy come back?
Yeah, well, I reached out to the Attorney General's department because copyright content and enforcing those rights is, their head of power. They sent us a statement, and in that statement they said that they consider developments on an ongoing basis by commissioning things like surveys. The last survey that they did was in 2023. And that report actually suggested that the solution lay in availability and cost. So most people who pirate would stop if they could A, get their content legally, and B, at a price that is reasonable.
Yeah.
So, while cost is a factor, though, it's not entirely the whole story. And I know I've spoken about cost like it is the whole story here, but that's a point that the founder of Steam, one of the world's biggest gaming platforms, Gabe Newell, he made it all the way back in 2009 to the ABC. And here's what he had to say.
There's an assumption that piracy is about people want to steal stuff from you. But when you look at the fact that these people have, $2,000 PCs and, they're spending $50 a month or more on their internet connections, clearly they're willing to spend money. So piracy is a result of bad service. People are happy to pay money if they're getting what they perceive as a great product delivered on their terms.
That's such an interesting point. And that's exactly right, is that, we mentioned it's the tiered subscriptions. They're sneaking ads in now to streaming stuff when you're already paying for it. Cracking down on people sharing things within a household. Like, people feel hard done by. Then you add on extra costs. That's what he's saying, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. Interestingly, the ACCC had been looking into digital platform services for 5 years, and they handed down their findings last year. And what they proposed when it comes to streamers is that the government crack down on unfair pricing and practices. So the government in principle said they're on board with this. We haven't really seen any movements in this space just yet. I mean, ideally, when I think about a solution, I would love to see bundles. I would love to see pay for what you watch. You have a certain amount of hours of Netflix or Stan or whatever, but that's not going to exist because capitalism, baby. It's just not going to happen.
Well, look, you never know. Maybe the streamers will start losing so much money, more people will go to piracy, that maybe they will look to make some changes and win people back. You never know.
Yeah, well, here's to hoping. And look, that is it for my deep dive for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you are someone who thinks we're in the golden age of piracy, or if you're someone who has been pirating this whole time and never really slowed down or stopped, feel free to get in touch with us in the DMs because, yes, like we mentioned, piracy is a crime and we don't want anyone outing themselves on public platforms should they not feel comfortable to do so. Alrighty, I'm Chris Beer. I'll catch you next time.